We know how the system works, the media, also the so-called alternative media. I even say that when we liberate Palestine, I hope that we will do that on the ruins of Israel has exposed its true face to the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast. Today, I have a really special guest with me. His name is Ronnie Barkan, who is an Israeli dissident, and he is also a member of the AntiZionist conference that took place recently in Vienna. And Ronnie has been active for a very long time, way before 2023, calling for the rights of the Palestinian people, calling for equality between the Jordan River to the sea. And tonight I'm going to discuss all of the latest developments with him, a little bit more about his background and the historic anti-Zionist Jewish conference that took place in Vienna and what that could mean for the future as well. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining me. I'm pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me, Mahmood.
So, Ronnie, let's begin with the initial thing. I have spoken to, and firstly, allow me to say that I feel like the voices of either Palestinians who come from Israel or occupied Palestine, or Israeli Jews coming out from Israel and who were born there, who oppose Israel as an apartheid entity, who are staunch anti-Zionists and call for the simple and most straightforward solution of a one equal state between the Jordan River to the sea, I feel like the voices are very heavily suppressed and censored. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people now realize that they're being, shadow banned and so on. That's the norm as far as I'm concerned. I would never get too much attention whenever I post anything that I find important. And I usually don't post about what I had for breakfast. So basically, what happens is that the important stuff that I feel, at least, that is important would hardly get any attention. That's just one example. But in general, we know how the system works, the media, also the so-called alternative media. And even the narrative of the so-called alternative media is catered to a certain audience. And I can also name names if you like. And they peddle this discourse of lies that is basically what's called liberal Zionist discourse. The whole Haaretz narrative, for example. I mean, I see Haaretz newspaper as the greatest tool of Zionist propaganda, the leading tool of Zionist propaganda. I even say that when we liberate Palestine, I hope that we will do that on the ruins of the building of Haaretz newspaper. This is the extent to which I think that they are complicit in crime. But
some people might ask, if you wouldn't mind me interrupting for 1 second, and I will allow you to continue. Some people may ask, well, why are you against the most supposedly liberal of the Jewish newspapers inside of Israel?
Yes. So Zionist propaganda has been very, very effective. Actually, it has been very effective until 10th of October 2023, where things have started to change quite dramatically because Israel has exposed its true face to the world. It was there all along. The Zionist race state was founded as a Zionist race state by design, an exclusive state for one and only one type of people. And the only way to establish that is if you want to establish a place for one and only one type of people in a land that's already occupied or inhabited by others, then the only way to go about it is either ethnic cleansing or genocide. That's it. So ethnic cleansing and genocide is part of the mentality, part of the thinking and practice of every single thing that is happening in the Zionist race state. From the first, obviously, the ethnic cleansing itself of 48, the every single law that was legislated, from the very first law, the law of return, which is, it's an apartheid law by design, and on and on. So when we talk about apartheid, for example, when I give talks and I speak about apartheid, I hardly ever touch on the minor occupation of 67, the later occupation of 67. When I speak about apartheid, the most part of apartheid is relating to 48 is, first of all, the fact that the majority of Palestinians cannot even live in Palestine because they were born into the wrong ethnic racial category. And even those who are inside Palestine have been segregated, subjugated in different Bantustans, ghettos, and now concentration camps turned into extermination camps. And even those who are 48ers, those who are citizens of that race state, the apartheid state, are far from being equal citizens. And the entire, and I can give you many examples, I don't think I have to tell you because you have firsthand experience, basically, being a second-class citizen basically means that you have to be subjugated. I mean, you're being taught not to raise your head and not, the whole terminology of referring to oneself as an Israeli Arab, for example, which should be regarded as a derogatory term. Those Palestinians who are more aware, obviously would refer to themselves as 48ers or Palestinians, etc. But this whole narrative. Now, if you read Haaretz, for example, you will hear the whole discourse of lies, starting with Israel and Palestine. There is no Israel and Palestine. It's the exact same spot of land. Israel is Palestine. One is built literally on top of and at the expense of the others. The whole issue of the occupation, the settlements, referring to the minor occupation, the later settlements of 67, not the actual settlements, including Haifa, including Akka, Yafa, not the actual occupation, which started at the latest in 48. Actually, even technically speaking, there was military rule until 1966 inside the territory of what's called
inside
Israel.
of 1948, there was a period where the Palestinian citizens of Israel lived under military rule. I remember in Haifa, for example, there's an area that's still called the checkpoint because people were being checked before they went to other Arab villages. And only later on it was lifted, and then we had the 1967 occupation, and so on, following that as well.
Exactly. So I know, and like the list of lies is endless. I mean, talking about the Israeli left. I know all the Israeli leftists. There's about 500 of us, and they're all anti-Zionist. And obviously the Palestinians who are anti-Zionist, of course. There's so many lies. Now, the problem is that narrative has been very effective for too long. The narrative that tries to sugarcoat the real issue, tries to uses this liberal discourse to try to basically to point the finger at, yes, there's the occupation and there's the settlements and the fascist right-wing government, which are all bad, but they're not the main issue. They're just the later part, the additional problem. The main problem is the very fact that this is a race state by design for one and only one type of people. And there is zero legitimacy to it whatsoever. There's absolutely nothing legitimate about the Zionist race state as was implemented in Palestine. So when people understand it in that way, obviously everything changes. I think that nowadays, because Zionism has exposed its face to the world in the most barbaric, monstrous way, people are forced to rethink. I saw, for example, Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. She gave this heated speech, kind of like a monologue, and she says, "Israelis, we hate you. You made us hate you." And Anna Kasparian, for example, who is very intelligent and she's a very good commentator on other things, but she's still pretty much progressive except for Palestine. So she's pretty much regurgitating that liberal Zionist discourse because she's seeking always the peace-loving Israelis, promoting all these horrible, atrocious organizations like Breaking the Silence and whatever, all the others. But nowadays, seeing what is happening in Gaza, people like her and her colleagues are forced into taking a much more, real anti-Zionist stance because the situation is so in our faces, is so well documented, and is so atrocious.
Which brings us back to the early days, because you're referring to some people who, of course, speak about Palestine and the genocide now, whereas really and truly they're not there for the main problem, which is Israel as a state, as an entity. This brings us back to October the 7th. We started to hear many people who were supposedly advocating for the Palestinian cause, and the only thing that they were concerned about after October the 7th, or Al-Aqsa flood, was to condemn the Palestinian resistance. Now, you made an interesting statement on the 7th of October, and you actually had a post, I think it was on X, saying that it was like a break out of the ghetto on the 7th of October. Can you elaborate on that and your view and your thoughts on the day, on what happened exactly?
Yes. So actually, on the morning of the 8th, I gave an interview to Crispin, in the UK, and I refer to it as the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. And unfortunately, I said that just like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which, basically the people there had to choose whether to die on their feet or on their knees. They knew that they will not be victorious in that, but it was a choice that they made. But the next thing that happened, obviously, was that the Nazis came in and liquidated the ghetto. And the new Nazis came in and, are in the process of liquidating the Gaza concentration camp, now turned into extermination camp. So I see it as analogous to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And we have to remember, actually, if we already talk about the Warsaw Uprising, the deputy leader of that uprising, Marek Edelman, was a staunch anti-Zionist with a Bund. His legacy will never be taught in Israel. The leader of that uprising, who died, who was killed in that uprising, was Anilevich, Mordechai Anilevich, and he's known in every school book and every whatever in 48 in Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it. His name is mentioned. His deputy commander, who survived, who was a hero of the uprising, who later became a local Polish hero. His legacy has been erased as much as possible by the Zionists. He wrote the most comprehensive account about the uprising, called The Ghetto Fights. It took 50 years to translate it into Hebrew. It was translated to many languages. Actually, Yitzhak Rabin and the Israeli leadership, when they held a memorial service in Warsaw Ghetto for the 50 year marking 50 years to the uprising, it was the Israeli government that insisted that the Polish will disinvite Edelman from that memorial service. And he was the most senior representative, the hero of the uprising, the most senior representative of the uprising. And Israel really insisted that he will be disinvited. What happened eventually is that, it worked out in some way. Lech Walesa did this gesture where he held Marek Edelman's hand in one hand and his grandson, Edelman's grandson, in the other, and all three of them went and laid a wreath of flowers on the memorial. So he endorsed and gave respect to that person. Now, why did they mention Edelman? First of all, because of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but Edelman was also wrote in solidarity with what he called the partisans of the Gaza ghetto. And he did that a few years before his death.
Wow.
Another thing that is symbolic more than anything, the March of Return, the Gaza March of Return in 2018, when people were marching to the fence between the Gaza concentration camp that is dividing between Gaza and the rest of Palestine. There is no border between Gaza and the rest of Palestine. There's a fence, a highly militarized.
They're trying to go back home to Asqalan,
exactly.
to Yafa,
exactly. They were trying
Haifa,
to go back
right?
home. Exactly.
But Israel doesn't allow them.
Yes. So when they did that, they were shot down by snipers.
And it was totally peaceful. For the listeners and viewers who don't know, it was an absolutely peaceful march. The Palestinians started to do that in Gaza in 2018, a weekly protest every single Friday, people simply marching to the borders. And we are talking about the people themselves who are descendants of the people who were expelled from 1948 occupied territories, and sometimes the people themselves who were expelled, elderly. And at that time, Israel killed hundreds of them, and the IDF was killing people deliberately with shots to the head, and sometimes with shots with malicious intent to make sure that these people are disabled, like shots to the knees.
Yes,
Yet
exactly.
there was hardly, again, any coverage of that. And whenever some people talk to you about the subject of today, especially the pro-Zionist propaganda, they'll tell you, oh, but in the 7th of October, as if history started on the 7th of October.
Yes. So and we have to understand that. And in 2018, it was already unbearable. The situation in Gaza was unbearable. According to the UN report, Gaza would have become unlivable by 2020. And already 95% of the water was unpotable, not fit for human consumption. Israel has been calculating the caloric intake for the people of Gaza. They had to admit it in an Israeli court, actually. What is happening today is that they simply turned the dial from the 2,200 and some calories that they decided on to zero. This is, but it's the same type of thinking that's operating all the time. And the people of Gaza were simply demanding their most basic rights, most fundamental rights.
Basic rights, absolutely.
Yeah, the vast majority of the population there, 80% or so, are refugees from just across the fence. When they went on the 7th of October, They broke the fence and they went to the other side. They said, "We're the Mustautanat, we're the settlement."
Settlements, yeah.
The same kibbutzim that
Exactly.
are being mentioned all the time. Okay, these
Yeah.
are the settlements. Not only in the West Bank,
Yeah.
you have settlements, also those just across the fence.
Absolutely. And that's part of the propaganda that is being published today. And especially with, like, you'll see documentaries, they'll tell you about the settlements. And the problem is the radical elements in the settlements. And some people will tell you, oh, we have a ban on people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, completely disregarding the fact that every single Israeli establishment, ever since 1967, was protecting the settlement, or what I like to call the squatting establishment in the West Bank, even with governments who were considered to be left-leaning.
Yes.
That's why there's a lot of hypocrisy in this process. You'll see some of the people who claim they're leftists in Israel, they'll tell you, oh, no, and the settlements, but like, you were protecting them. You were there protecting the people, and you knew you were in a military rule over the Palestinian people inside of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Ronnie, let's go back to the beginning. So you were born in Israel. Tell us about the places you were born in, a little bit more about your upbringing, and what brought you to this level of taking a position of outright dissident and being a staunch anti-Zionist and a very active voice for the rights of the Palestinian people and for equality between the Jordan River to the sea.
So I was born not far away from Tel Aviv, Ra'anana, if you know. And I didn't have too much of a political upbringing, but I was also never too much of a Zionist, and I was never too militaristic, just a little bit of Zionist, because, you know, we're all trained to be soldiers from kindergarten, and I have to correct that. I used to say that statement, you know, we're trained to be soldiers from kindergarten. And then a friend showed me this ad for a maternity ward in Tel Aviv. And the ad shows a fetus in the womb wearing a military beret and giving the salute.
Wow.
And then the caption says, basically, winner of the decorated with the President's Award 18 years from now, basically. And the message is, you too should come and have your baby with us in our hospital, because your son will also become a decorated soldier. So when I say that we're being trained to be soldiers from kindergarten, I have to now kind of take it back, actually. It's even before we are born, we're already being looked at as, you know, these decorated or whatever soldiers. So this is a Sparta state, and we are being trained to be soldiers. It's part and parcel of the Israeli identity is to be soldiers, and it's also an easy way to differentiate between the wanted people and the unwanted people. The unwanted are obviously the Palestinians, who do not serve in the army, the most part, and, you know, it's an issue with those who do serve, and the ultra-Orthodox, who many of them are anti-Zionist for their reasons, not necessarily because they're pro-Palestinian, but they're still anti-Zionist because they live a whole other type of life. They don't see themselves as Israeli. And the ultra-Orthodox and obviously the Palestinians are being treated as, at best, second-class citizens. And it is an easy way for Israelis to justify it and say, well, you know, they don't serve in the army. They don't deserve to be treated as equals. They don't earn their rights. And the whole notion of democracy, and again, I'm sure that you know that, is that for Israelis, first of all, when we say Israelis, obviously we never count the 20% who are not Israeli Jews. Okay, so even in the language, when we say Israeli, it's an exclusive society, and when we say Israeli, we don't count all Israeli citizens. So for those Israelis, their notion of democracy is simply the rule of the majority. That's it. If we are the majority, we get to decide, and that's pretty much it. Now, how can they feel that they are democratic if they deny more than half of all Palestinians from even living in Palestine, and then they deny all the others their basic rights, you know, because they live in different Bantustans and military occupied territories, and even those who are who are citizens of the state are by law second-class citizens and denied the important rights. And we can talk about how that operates. Then they can feel that they are democratic. You know, then they get, if you only count the 7 million privileged Israeli Jews out of the 21 million, that includes the 7 million plus the 14 million Palestinians. If you only count the 7 million and plus maybe a little bit of those who are second-class citizens among the Palestinians, then you can feel that you're democratic. So this is kind of the type of thinking that operates. So I went to that issue of Israeli society, but about myself, I was never too much of a nationalist, but I was still born into that society. So I was contemplating whether I'm willing to serve in the army or not. For 6 years, 3 years of high school and then 3 years of university. And the reason I went to university before the army is actually in order to give me more time to contemplate, to think about it, because I didn't want to be a soldier, but I also couldn't convince myself not to be. And I had no one to talk to about that. Not the family, not school. No one understood the concept of what do you mean you don't want to go to the army. I didn't even know terms like conscientious objector. I just didn't know the term. So I was already supporting people like Mordechai Vanunu, the nuclear whistleblower, who is regarded as a traitor in Israel. And yet I couldn't convince myself not to get drafted. So I ended up getting drafted because I didn't want to feel like a parasite or a traitor. This is what we are being told, that if you don't serve in the army, you're kind of somehow like a parasite. So I got drafted. And 2 months into the army, I had this eureka moment. I had this realization. And that realization was basically that, I have a choice in the matter. And that moment, that realization meant that at that moment, I stopped being a soldier. I stopped being an Israeli. I'm a human being. My only obligation is to something that is universal. The only thing I can be a traitor of is humanity. And from that moment on, the rest was very clear. It was straightforward. Because the situation is not complicated. It was just this kind of understanding. And the moment that I had this understanding, the rest was straightforward. I became an activist. I started I supported other conscientious objectors because I also had my own. So
you basically asked to be removed as a conscientious objector. And were you punished for that as well? Because some people get in prison for up to 6 months, right?
So unfortunately, I wasn't sent to prison in the military. Afterwards, I had some experiences in civilian prison, but I wasn't sent to prison because, for some strange reason, the person who was in charge, my commander, she was actually on my side. She tried to help me, so she never informed her superiors that I was not actually acting as a soldier. So she didn't want to send me to prison, which was very nice of her, but that means that I was kind of going under the radar. So how can I get out of the system when the system doesn't even know that I am a problematic soldier, which doesn't act as a soldier? I never showed up. I only did what was needed in order to get out. I went to see doctors, I went to see psychologists, I went to see committees, I went to all of these, and no one was willing to let me out because I wasn't playing their game. I was just sitting there, just like now, and I was telling them, I'm not part of this. I'm not part of this game. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. It's your problem. Do whatever you like. But if I don't play the game, I don't give them anything to work with. If I would have claimed that I was suicidal or that I was depressed or whatever, then it would give them something to work with. But I was just being me. And truth doesn't liberate in that sense. So it took a long while. It took me 1.5 years of basically fighting the system until eventually I managed to get out. But already then, and obviously afterwards, I was already an activist. I was helping other conscientious objectors. I went to the West Bank to demonstrate. I joined Anarchists Against the Wall, which was formed, roughly at that time when they were building the annexation wall. Later on, co-founded a group of conscientious Israelis who support the Palestinian call for BDS. The short name is
Yes. Let's actually talk about that. The BDS. You started a movement called Boycott from Within, if I'm not mistaken. And this movement, you formed it with several other people from Israel, Kobe Snitz, Lehi Rothschild, and Ofer Neyman. And so what made you guys develop this group and to boycott Israel from within? And how was that even possible?
So, first of all, the name. Boycott from Within is the short and catchy name. Actually, the official name is Boycott Supporting the Palestinian BDS Call from Within. So obviously you understand why the short name is being used and not the long name, because it's impossible to pronounce it. But it was important for us to say we are not coming up with anything of our own. We are not the ones who are there to dictate to the Palestinians how they should struggle or to dictate the forms of boycott. We are in solidarity with the Palestinian-led BDS campaign by, the BNC, PACB, like Boycott National Committee, and PACB, the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott. So it was the analogy. Just like we will talk about the Anti-Zionist Congress soon, I guess, so it's kind of the same type of analogy. The analogy is like, what can white folks under apartheid South Africa do to support the oppressed black people in their struggle, in their just struggle? So it wasn't about us coming up with our version of a boycott, as liberal Zionists do. There are all kinds of liberal Zionist organizations that say, we boycott settlement products. They're not there to actually promote Palestinian rights. They are just there to promote their cherished supremacist state within the confines of the Green Line. That's why they boycott settlement products. In order to protect and perpetuate apartheid, they boycott settlement products. It's the exact opposite motivation. So this is not our goal. Our goal is to stand by Palestinian rights, and there are the three protected rights as are expressed in the BDS call. Equality, freedom, and justice, basically equality for those who are second-class citizens, freedom from the occupation, ending of the occupation, and finally, and most importantly, the rights of the refugees, the right to return, and reparation, repatriation, and all the rest. When you put this in one package, you basically abolish Zionism. Because Zionism is based on everything that's opposed to equality, everything that's opposed to multiculturalism,
Absolutely.
everything that's opposed. So when you say all the people of that land deserve the full rights, the full Bill of Rights, it means that you abolish Zionism. Like the two things cannot work together. So this is why liberal Zionists will never.
Or at least, if I may add, they want to perceive it as that way. So let's say, for example, I don't have a problem. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with anyone from a Jewish descent having a desire to live in Palestine, regardless of whatever they want to call it, for religious purposes. Why should I have a problem with that? I have a problem with an ideology using religion as a militant tool to oppress other people and expel them from their land. That's the problem that I have. I don't have a problem with someone wanting to live there because they love the land for religious purposes. Many people view the land as holy for religious purposes. But you can't use that as an excuse to have a military rule over other people. But that's something that we have never seen Zionism do, because it wasn't founded to do that.
Yes, exactly. And also, Zionists would like to tell the world that this is some sort of a religious conflict. First of all, it's not religious, and it is not a conflict. It is all about the settler colonialists who are supremacists, who are all about exclusivity and backed by the powers, the West, etc., and versus the indigenous people who have been oppressed and subjugated and terrorized since the very foundation of the Zionist state. And those indigenous people have their rights, and this is basically what we are fighting for. It's a no-brainer. It's no different than any other basically form of struggle of the indigenous people versus the ones who have been oppressing them. But the Zionists would like to tell us that it's something else, that there is a conflict, that it is of a religious nature, which it is not. Actually, the Zionist race state has precisely nothing to do with Judaism, because Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It uses and abuses Judaism. It uses and abuses Judaism to justify its sinister practice. But Zionism, and we can, talk about that forever, but Zionism is based on everything that's opposed to Judaism. Okay, and even if I put it
thou
like this,
shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, you shall not covet. Where are the 10 commandments? You know what I mean? And absolutely, I totally agree with that notion. And I speak about that repeatedly. Unfortunately, there are people who are using that as an excuse to speak about Judaism as a whole. And I think not only does that stem out of pure ignorance, it only serves the narrative of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel to tell them that, look, they are against the Jewish people. when it was never intended to be about the Jewish people, and when some people even doubt that Herzl himself had the real, genuine Jewish roots, and when the founders of Israel were atheists, people who aren't really religious people, and people who are, some of them don't believe in God. Netanyahu himself, within close circles, he declared they didn't believe in God. So how can you believe in all of these promises and tell us that you're fighting for the Jewish state?
So you see, I am anti-Zionist because I'm a humanist, okay, or because I respect the rights of all living beings. My friends who are ultra-Orthodox Jews, they are anti-Zionist because they are Jewish. Because Zionism is the greatest threat. Zionism is the greatest threat to their Jewish life, to their Judaism.
Yes.
Zionism started as an anti-Jewish phenomena. They hated Herzl and his friends. They wanted to be like the rest of the Europeans in Vienna and elsewhere. But they were treated badly because they were regarded as being coming from the Jewish background. But they loathed the religious Jews of Europe. They were saying the most racist things about them, that they were backwards, that they were carrying disease, that they were like rats. They really hated it. Now, one of Herzl's first ideas, by the way, how to solve what he called the Jewish problem, is that they should all go to the cathedral on a Sunday when the bells are ringing and mass convert into Christianity. And then problem solved, according to him. He wrote it down in his diary. Wow. He wasn't able to convince others of that, but the thinking was he wanted to fully assimilate and be just like all the other Europeans around him, which is, in itself, okay, if he doesn't want to be part of that group, he wants to be part of another group, no problem with that. The problem was that when he wasn't successful with that, with being regarded as one among the other Europeans, because there was real anti-Semitism around, we have to admit that, the blame was on those religious Jews, that because of them, we are being treated badly. But the next step was, okay, so if we are being treated badly because we are somehow regarded as Jewish, then we must be different. We must be special. And therefore, we need to have a place for us and only for us. And they fully adopted the anti-Semitic discourse of the time, fully adopted it one-to-one. I can even show you a quote from Lucian Wolff in the 1920s or so. He was the head of a leader of the Jewish community in London. And he wrote a letter to Lord Baron Rothschild. And he wrote that it is bad enough when the anti-Semites Jews tell us that we cannot be part of the rest of society and we will never be able to be an integral part of the society. And it is even worse when it comes from the Zionists. So that leader of the Jewish community in Britain understood that the Zionists and the anti-Semites speak the same language and want essentially pretty much the same things. And it's no surprise that, Lord Balfour, he was an outspoken anti-Semite. He was a horrible racist. That's why he supported the establishment of a Zionist state in Palestine. But even then, even Balfour and even the partition plan of 47 of the UN, as horrible as they were, all of those still acknowledged that those people in Palestine who are not among the Jewish group, they deserve to have their rights. So it was about carving out some territory and having a quote-unquote Jewish state, obviously nothing to do with Judaism, but it still acknowledged the rights of those people who inhabited that land to full equality. But full equality or any type of rights for those who are not among the privileged group doesn't sit well with Zionism. It directly contradicts the Zionist type of thinking of exclusivity.
No. I think that the British mandate at the time was trying to whitewash its abhorrent position with the Balfour Declaration, with the release of the white papers that were literally completely disregarded by the Zionists. But that's something that I always mention. Europe used to say and used to have conferences about finding solutions alongside Hitler, finding solutions or the final solution for the Jewish question, and Zionism came and gave them that answer for their question. That's what they did. That's why we had the Havara agreement or the transfer agreement in coordination between Zionism and the Nazis. Yet people to this day, they try and hide these facts as if they didn't exist.
Yes, I'll tell you something else because you mentioned the Ava agreement and the collaboration with the Nazis. I was just speaking, I gave a talk in Vienna recently, and I was asked something about Jewish self-determination. So I started by saying, do you know what's Jewish self-determination? A bunch of Jews going to the synagogue and praying. That's Jewish self-determination. That's the only thing, the way that I can understand it. Because Judaism is a religion and nothing else. Zionism is a whole other thing, which has nothing to do with Judaism. Zionism, which opposes Judaism, created something that doesn't exist in Judaism. For example, what they call Jewish nationalism. There is no nationalism in Judaism. And
exactly, it can be of any nationality.
Yeah, and they created a whole other thing, which is a racist, supremacist, exclusive ideology in practice, nationalistic ideology in practice. Now, so for one thing, the whole issue of self-determination for Jews, that is a religious issue. It's not a national issue in any way. If you want to talk about nationalism, sure, let's talk about nationalism. Zionism is all about nationalism. And it's about the state and the worshiping of the state. Judaism is about God and the worshiping of God. And I can show how all the values and practices of Judaism versus Zionism are actually totally contradictory to each other. For example, just one example, Judaism is fundamentally an inclusive religion. It doesn't try to convert people. It makes it difficult, but it is possible to convert. Zionism is fundamentally about exclusivity. It's about establishing a place for us and only for us. And for that reason, you can convert to Judaism in Britain or in France or anywhere else in the world, but your conversion to Judaism will not necessarily be accepted in Israel, because in Israel, the religion has been nationalized. It is used as a tool of the state to make sure that there is segregation. Therefore, the Zionist race state also practices Sharia law. There are 11 Sharia courts for the sake of marriage and divorce, because they don't want, that's a side issue, but they don't want Jews marrying with non-Jews, because it's all about segregation and, creating an exclusive.
There is an organization opposed to mixed marriages.
Yes.
Or to ban mixed marriage in the state of Israel. These people go and protest outside of any wedding of two totally consenting adults who wish to marry. But if the man happens to be an Arab Palestinian and the woman is a Jew, or the opposite, and these people go and actually try and stop the marriage because they don't want people to mix. It's insane. Yet these are the things that they don't tell you. These are the things that they don't want to let the people know. Ronnie, let's move on to the recent months. Of course, you've been very vocal since the genocide, and following that, protesting social media. But I think there's a very key moment that happened in the past several months, which is the AntiZionist conference that took place in Vienna, the Jewish AntiZionist Congress. And I had a post at that time, approximately, if I'm not mistaken, 128 years after the first Zionist conference, we have a Jewish anti-Zionist conference taking place in Vienna. Tell us a little bit more about it. Who participated? What did you come up with? Why? And where is it going? I'm sure many people would love to know about that.
So the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress took place in Vienna in June of this year, just a couple of months ago. It was, first of all, I'm happy to say that it was a great success. Many people showed up over the course of 3 days of discussions, and also practical discussions, not only theoretical. There were roughly 1,000 people showed up, and of people of all backgrounds. It wasn't an exclusive Congress, on the contrary. The name Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress, people assume that it is all about being Jewish or only for Jews. No, nothing like that. So let me explain. It was initiated by a group of obviously anti-Zionist Jews, people like myself. By the way, I don't identify as Jewish for normal life, but for that purpose, it is important. Why? Because the Zionist race state claims to speak on our behalf. So we have to stand up against that. Okay, the Zionist state is the one who, by law, defines me as a privileged Israeli Jew. Not because I consider myself Israeli or Jewish, but by law, my legal status under Israeli apartheid is that I'm a privileged Israeli Jew. And any Jew born around the world, doesn't matter if they are affiliated or not affiliated with Judaism or with Zionism, is regarded as a potential citizen of the state under Israeli law. And the Zionist state claims to speak on their behalf, on our behalf. So it is important for us to gather and to stand up against that. Now, I actually initially tried to organize something similar 8 years ago to mark 120 years to the first Zionist Congress. And I was doing that with the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Mea Shearim, in Jerusalem, occupied Jerusalem, etc. Eventually, it didn't materialize. I'm very happy that the people in Vienna kind of raised the glove and came up with the idea. And obviously, I was happy to join, and we organized the Anti-Zionist Congress, the Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress. Now, it is not Jewish in the sense that it is discussing Judaism, and it is not exclusively for Jews. What it is about is us, those that the Zionist state claims to speak in our name, getting together along with our Palestinian partners and allies from around the world to have a clear front, or even a declaration of war, I would say, on Zionism. So it is our strength of getting together all those people who are Jewish or coming from Jewish background, etc., getting together and having a clear anti-Zionist statement, unequivocally anti-Zionist. Again, in an analogy to apartheid South Africa, it would be like a bunch of white folks who are anti-apartheid, dissidents, organizing an anti-apartheid conference, not only for them, primarily for actually, for the sake of the rights of those who are oppressed, the black folks under apartheid, etc. In our case, the Palestinians and our many allies from around the world, they all joined forces, and it was a great success. We are already working on the next Congress. I'm happy to say that even people said that this was a historic achievement, a historical moment, and I'm happy that that is the case, because this was the intention, basically, to create something that will help with that movement that is needed to abolish Zionism. And that movement exists, but it needs to kind of to galvanize and to kind of be empowered in a way by those voices of those who are regarded as Jewish, etc. So this was the intention. We discussed the history of Zionism and the history of the struggle against Zionism, which is as old as Zionism itself. But also the Jewish struggle against Zionism is as old as Zionism itself. But also we discussed practical measures about what is needed in order to abolish Zionism. And in our declaration, it's quite a long declaration, a long kind of list of points that we make, which kind of goes through some of the needed events, needed measures in order to abolish Zionism. So, for example, we are calling on the UN to expel Israel from the General Assembly, as was done with South Africa in 1974 for its crime of apartheid. Israel is far more criminal than South Africa ever was. We are calling for a protection force from the UN to protect the people of Palestine. We are calling, obviously, for international organizations to sever ties with Israeli institutions. We're calling on civil society to stand by the BDS movement and adhere to the BDS guidelines, and so on. At the time of the Congress, it was when Israel attacked Iran. So we also called for sanctions on Israel because of its assault, its attack on Iran. And I would add also, we ask for supervision in order by the International Atomic Energy, what is it called? IAEA, I forgot the acronym, the name, to supervise the way forward in order to basically decommission Israeli nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons from across the region, and on and on. So there are different points. And maybe what's also important for me to mention about the declaration, the final points the last two paragraphs. In the last two paragraphs, we make it clear that Zionism does not represent Judaism or Jews in any way, shape, or form. And actually, it's claimed to represent Jews and treat Jews as a monolith and say that if one is Jewish, then therefore they are necessarily also Zionist. That in itself is the greatest form of anti-Semitism, the greatest form of racism and anti-Semitism. To say that just because of my Jewishness, whatever that means, I'm inherently, because of that, I'm also a Zionist and support that.
A Zionist,
horrible,
yes.
Yeah, it's basically like saying that all Muslims are terrorists. All Zionists are apartheid, genocide lovers. That's one thing that we had to make clear. Another thing that we wanted to say is that we are also calling on Israeli Jews, also Jews from around the world, to join us and to join the struggle for Palestine and for Palestinian rights, to reconsider their allegiance with Zionism. And this is the time to do that. If there was ever a time to reconsider where they stand on Zionism, this is the time to do so. And also to say that we want to stand kind of like shoulder to shoulder in this. It is a collective effort. It is not about, again, it's not about us Jews speaking in internal Jewish discourse. It's not a Jewish thing to stand by Palestinians. It's a human thing. We just have extra responsibility because we are those who are the privileged folks, those that the Zionist state claims to speak on our behalf. So we are actually expected to have a say and to have a very clear statement for the abolishment of Zionism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in my opinion, I think one of the most important things that you've done with that conference is give a home to anti-Zionist Jews. Because whereas you've had the religious anti-Zionists, who are, by the way, in occupied Palestine now. For example, in Ma'asharim, next to Jerusalem, if you'll go there, they'll tell you Zionists not welcome. If you're a Zionist, don't enter. That's why the Israeli Minister of National Security went there to cause provocation, and he was met with intense process, and his wife ended up slapping one of the protesters. So they have a group, though. So the Orthodox communities who oppose Zionism, whether it's Neturei Karta or others in the mainstream Orthodox Jewry in Israel, they have their community, they have their backing, they have their supporters. If you are a person who was born in a normal family or an average Zionist family, or you're abroad and you have these ties and people fall into the propaganda and the whole use of the victimhood and the Holocaust, it's a little bit more difficult for you. At least you have an address where you can be part of an organization with a group of people who, some of them wouldn't necessarily be religious, or like yourself, you put yourself out as a humanist first and for a humanitarian perspective, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think that's a very important thing. Which leads us to this moment, Ronnie. All of what we're doing, online activism, videos, coverage, telling the truth, pushing, all of that is highly effective. It's very, very important. It's crucial. But the genocide is still going. You are one of the people who showed outright support for military intervention against Israel. Posted that when it was common on social media, after there was suppression, by the way, on social media. I, an Israeli dissident, support an immediate military intervention to stop the genocide taking place in the Gaza extermination camp. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it reflects your vision on how the solution can come to end the genocide and to establish one democratic state with equal rights between the Jordan River to the sea.
So I think that because the governments have failed so miserably to do anything about this genocide, this ongoing genocide, the first live stream genocide, also the first AI run, so it's kind of, part of it is totally automated form of genocide, which is horrible to think about. And the governments are doing absolutely nothing about it. I have to say the governments other than two, possibly, Yemen, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, they have shown that they are standing and trying to do something to oppose this genocide, and more recently Iran, that responded. Actually, it was acting, and it's without too much, without too much sympathy to the regime there, but they have shown that actually they are the only responsible adult in the room when you look at like the whole issue with the US and Israel and Iran, etc., where they have been attacked and they responded in a very measured way and targeted mostly military installations, etc. So, but let's ask, what are the other countries doing? I mean, even South Africa that, took this to the ICC, etc. I mean, what are they doing? What boat was monitoring or accompanying the Medellin or the Handala, which were making their way to Gaza?
No one. No Arab country, no European country, no Africa, no one. They were going on their own, unprotected, when they were sailing in international waters.
Yes, and also more recently, Francesca Albanese, she was saying that actually it's the obligation of states to send in boats to enforce basically and to make sure that human rights are being, the rights of Palestinians in Gaza are being met, etc. So yes, I mean, none of that is happening. So it is definitely up to us. So first of all, the call for a military intervention, I think it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious when we understand the situation, when we understand that Israel is doing everything it does with full impunity and with the full support of the West. And this is also mentioned in our declaration of the Anti-Zionist Congress. We make it clear that Israel, first of all, if you want, I mean, I will just we mention kind of this list of crimes, which is not just genocide. I mean, sorry, I'll just go through this very quickly, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Ethnic cleansing, militarized apartheid, herbicide, scholasticide, medicide, mass starvation as an instrument of forced expulsion of more than 2 million Gazans, as well as an extant genocide of hundreds of thousands, one of the worst war crimes of our time. So, it's not, I cannot say just genocide, because genocide is the crime of crimes, but we have this monstrosity that is happening where every single state is obligated by law under even the Genocide Convention of 1974, obligated to oppose that. And still they don't even stop the association agreement with Israel. The EU, every single member state of the EU with no exception, is criminal. They are obligated not only under international law, but also under European law, because Article 2 of the agreement, of that association agreement, which basically is about the business ties and more than just business ties, any association with Israel. Article 2 of the agreement says that if there is a consistent human rights violation, which obviously there is, then the EU is obligated to seize the agreement. They're allowed to take corrective measures. They're allowed to sanction, for example. They're allowed to take other corrective measures. There's one thing that they are not allowed to do is to carry on with business as usual with Israel. But every single member state of the EU chooses to look the other way in order to protect Israel, to protect the criminals, and violate their own European law, let alone international law. So this is the level of politics that we have today. And obviously, you're in the UK, you know how criminal the UK government is. And how complicit it is in this ongoing genocide.
It's a participant, it's not just complicit, and yes. It doesn't matter what they do, they just try and whitewash their position. Like now, tying the position of, we will recognize a Palestinian state if there is no ceasefire by September. Oh, really? So firstly, you had an option to apply pressure on Israel. The Israeli foreign minister, Gideon Saar, went back to Israel a couple of months back from Europe in a tour where he clearly heard some things that he didn't like. And he was aware of the fact that European countries can use leverage, economic leverage against Israel, including boycott and sanctions, and that will apply pressure on Israel. That means they could have done that 2 years ago, not just now. And now European countries are talking to you about a two-state solution. Firstly, a theatrical scenario of a disarmed entity that has no sovereignty whatsoever, where the Palestinians are being told what to do in a typical arrogant neo-colonialist way. And they're also doing that to preserve the continuation of apartheid in historical Palestine. So in essence, what you're doing is you're preparing for the next genocide. Because if tomorrow the same apartheid Israel and Zionism decide that this small Palestinian state next to them is a threat, they'll kill 200,000-300,000 people or a million people. The only thing that we heard that was a little bit different this time was from the Irish president, who was asking to use Charter 7 of the UN to bypass the Security Council and go ahead and protect the Palestinians. It's purely to protect the people, but including by force, where the United Nations doesn't have to necessarily resort to the United Nations Security Council. Do you think that can be effective? Do you think it can reach that level with some countries?
I absolutely think that it can be effective. Not only that, I'm kind of optimistic in the sense that I don't think it takes much for the dominoes to start falling. But none of these countries want to be the first. But the moment that some of those countries change their tune, their stance on Israel, start applying real pressure, which they haven't done because for the time being they are all complicit in one way or another. In that sense, if you're neutral, you're also complicit, but they are actually actively complicit in crime in different ways. But the moment that they start changing their stance, I think that there is a chance that things will happen quite rapidly. Now, so first of all, protection, as you mentioned, protection of the people of Gaza who are under immediate threat. That's the first thing that needs to happen. That in itself will not solve the problem. It's just like an immediate step. Okay, it's obvious. It's like, like any other intervention to stop a crime that is happening right now. The Congress, the Anti-Zionist Congress, made a clear statement that the need is to abolish Zionism, because that is the only way forward. We cannot see a positive future while Zionism is legitimate, and Zionism has a Zionist state. Okay, people just like after the end of Nazism, people did not stop being Nazis, but it was no longer legal. They remained Nazis at home, and actually, in the case of Germany, where I'm actually based right now, Germany has not done even the first step of denazification. I mean, the Nazis still remained in positions of power and so on. But putting all of that aside, the first step is to make it illegal, to establish some basis that we can build upon, a basis that basically is opposed to everything that Zionism stands for. Zionism stands for exclusivity and the rights of one and only one type of people at the expense of all the others. For that purpose of exclusivity, it is all about either eliminating people, driving them away, or eradicating them altogether. And the opposite of that is obviously the respect of the rights of all the people of that land, writing a constitution, and all the rest. The Zionist state cannot have a constitution. A constitution would mean the end of Zionism in an instant, because a constitution, by its very definition, doesn't matter even if it's a shitty constitution, by its very definition, it has to protect the rights of all the people that fall into that constitution, that all the citizens of that state, for that matter. That in itself will immediately abolish Zionism, for example. Okay, so that's one thing. But there are other things that need to happen in Palestine in order to have a better future. But you mentioned the whole discourse of lies and the threat, actually the danger in that supposed acknowledgement of a Palestinian state, for example. Also in the past, when there was this whole campaign about acknowledging the 194th state, the Palestinian state, we had a campaign of saying Resolution 194, not State 194. We already have a Palestinian state. It's also called Israel, but it exists. Okay, there's no need to recognize Palestine. It exists. It is Palestine. Or as Darwish says, it was called Palestine. It is still called Palestine. I carry on and I say it was called Palestine. It is still called Palestine. If you're racist, you call it Israel, but it is still called Palestine. So, but that is kind of okay. There is a Palestinian state now. Why do states want to, quote unquote, recognize a Palestinian state? Because the counter side of that is also the acknowledgement, the legitimization of what is called the State of Israel. It is an act for the promotion and perpetuation and legitimization of apartheid and now genocide.
Exactly.
So this is a really, basically it's not about acknowledging Palestine, it's about acknowledging the state of Abbas, the state of Netanyahu's right-hand man in, Netanyahu's proxy in the West Bank. This is what it's about. Okay, the so-called Palestinian Authority who want to have, who want to keep their seats no matter what.
Absolutely.
So I reject this whole thing about recognizing Palestinian state. But in any case, the important thing are the rights. The important thing are the protection of people. The important thing are demanding full equality and recognition of international law. When we do all of that, obviously Zionism cannot sit well with any of that. Now, personally, because the states are not doing their job, it's up to us, the people, to stand up to our governments and to stand up for these rights of all the people. So, and especially so because I'm a privileged Israeli Jew, so it means that I'm also carrying more responsibility. So I also took direct action. For example, I went to smash up Elbit Systems in the UK. I flew in especially. We went to smash up the Elbit Systems headquarters in Bristol. We didn't cover our faces. We were live streaming it. There was also afterwards a legal thing, I was under house arrest. I was tried, convicted. But I compare that, the going to smash up Elbit Systems, I compare that to, when my grandmother was in Auschwitz. If she knew that someone was picking up a sledgehammer to smash up the Degesh factory that was producing the Cyclone B gas, she would have been appreciative of that. Maybe many lives would have been saved. For the very same reason, I went to smash up Elbit Systems. And I can actually show that Elbit is more dangerous and more monstrous and criminal than that factory that was only producing the poisonous gas, because Elbit are actually, right now, as we speak, they themselves are carrying out a genocide. They are working alongside the Israel genocide forces, and I can prove that. Okay, and they are not only producing the means of destruction, not only testing them on the Palestinians, not only selling it to the world as being battle tested, not only working in tandem with the Israeli army to produce all of these things per their requests, they are there, they have boots on the ground basically. They are there carrying out the missions alongside the Israeli soldiers. If they are not in Gaza, they're just outside of Gaza. So 100%. It is up to us, it is really up to us, the people, to stand up to all of that. And what happens in the UK, for example, right? We went to smash up that factory while the British government is doing everything in its power to criminalize, to protect the criminals and criminalize those who are trying to end the crime. I was there. I went there to uphold the law. To uphold the law that the British state is violating.
Absolutely. But this is what they've been doing all along, isn't it? The going against the Palestinian resistance. Number one, the very small number of countries, like 34, they will prescribe some of the Palestinian resistance movements as like a terrorist organization. Now, the British government is prescribing or has prescribed Palestine Action. And by the way, both of these prescriptions are being challenged now, even the Hamas one, the Palestine Action one. But from my perspective, these moves haven't been made and processed with the right steps, with due diligence. Like the Hamas one was totally political. I believe it was Priti Patel at the time, to close ties with Zionism and the IDF, was bribed by the Zionist lobby too. So it wasn't like there was a national debate. Oh, hey, look, there is this movement. What are the risks? Are they a threat to society? What do they do? No. All of it is political, but there is a higher level of malicious intent behind all of these moves, which is the fear factor. Instilling fear in the hearts of the people from supporting the most just cause in the 21st century. I mean, it's blatant to everyone who has a pair of eyes and ears and a little bit of, moral compass. You don't even have a lot of moral compass. And I think that in recent weeks, especially with the protests that happened in Britain, that proved to be a huge failure. Like a couple of days ago, hundreds of arrests, but also hundreds were not arrested. And you're talking about British people here challenging the narrative that's coming because they know what's behind this narrative. What's behind this narrative is an attempt to silence an attempt to instill fear, an attempt to demonize a legitimate act of resisting an apartheid entity that is committing war crimes, and the complicity of that apartheid entity committing war crimes. And these are things that the same governments who are banning these actions for these groups does with other countries if it's suitable for them. They will do it in Ukraine because it's suitable for them. They will do it in other countries too when it's suitable for them. But when it comes to the Palestinian people, the compass changes. That's why I always like to say,
see the level of hypocrisy there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ronnie, it was really a pleasure. Yeah, go ahead. Last words. Go ahead before we wrap up.
I'll tell you. First of all, there is one organization that is not being proscribed, which is obviously very much needed to be added to the list, which is the IDF. Okay.
No, the IDF. No, they're not. No, they shouldn't prescribe them, because the IDF. Why? Why should they prescribe them? They don't tell you disarm the IDF. They tell you about the day after in Gaza. You need to disarm Hamas, a group of people fighting in line with international law in occupied territories to protect themselves. But they don't tell you about the day after a country committing the worst war crimes in the 21st century. Urbanicide, genocide, infanticide, scholasticide, every war crime under the sun. They won't talk to you about that. But again, they're being exposed. And I think it's up to the people, like us, to continue to talk about it, to raise awareness, and to call for the most sane and straightforward solution, which is equal rights between the Jordan River to the sea. And we'll wrap it up there, I guess. Ronnie, listen, pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I've really enjoyed our chat. And good luck, of course, with all of the work in relation to the Anti-Zionist conference and movements and future conferences too. Hopefully we'll do it again at some point. But in the meantime, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And I will hopefully see you soon in the next show. Peace, everyone. Salam.